Well, hello, everyone. This is episode 11 of our online series. I'm Allan Tate, and my co-host is Irving Wladawsky-Berger. And we also have a special guest that I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do. I want to remind everybody that the next MIT Sloan CIO Symposium is on May 19th, 2026. We do hope to see you there. We do have a pre-event for VIPs that is on May 18th, 2026. If that's too far away, we are also um, doing a CIO Summer Dialogues program. This particular episode is part of that program. And what we're doing is we're inviting speakers from the 2025 symposium to return to do deeper dives on a variety of topics. And our guest speaker today is Isabella Loaiza. Um, who participated on the panel, The Impact of AI on Jobs and Skills. You can watch the video of that panel in our 2025 archive. But today we're going to explore Isabella's unique perspective on the impact of AI on the workforce. So, in addition to public podcasts like this one, we also have exclusive online events for paid subscribers to our Innovator Network. The annual fee to join that is $75. Next Tuesday, on July 29th, we'll have Helen Wang to talk about rethinking decision making in the age of AI. On Wednesday, August 6th, we'll have a public session with Vipin Gupta. He'll talk about the future will be won by companies with the best digital army. Then on Tuesday, August 19th, we'll have Melissa Swift back, who will talk about making space to play, leading organizational change in the age of AI. And finally, to close the CIO Summer Dialogues on August 26th, we'll have Carrie Perlson back for a session, and the title will be announced. I don't have it yet, but all of these folks were speakers at the symposium. We're having them all back. It's very exciting. So, um, before we get started, so Irving and Isabella, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm looking forward to this session. It's a very, very interesting session.
Excellent. And Isabella?
Well, I'm very happy. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm also very excited to see where our conversation is going to lead us today.
All right. Well, so what I'd like to do is sort of set the table for the conversation. You know, you wrote a very interesting paper that takes what I think of as a unique perspective with respect to AI. And if you would, I wanted to know if you could explain the five groups of capabilities that you talked about in your paper, what you call the EPOCH index.
Yes, of course. So this paper was co-written with Professor Roberta Rugabon, who is a professor at Sloan. And basically what we wanted to do was look at what are the human capabilities that allow humans to work in a way that complements AI and in a way in which we don't think about machines replacing humans. So we were able to distill the many capabilities in this framework that you mentioned, the EPOCH framework, where each letter stands for a bin of human capabilities. So E stands for empathy and emotional intelligence. In this bin, we have things like cooperation, connective labor. We have things like altruism, selflessness. These are all capabilities that we use in our work, maybe some more than others, but we still need a lot of cooperation and communication and empathy to be able to carry out different types of work that we do throughout the day. The P stands for presence, networking, and connectedness. So basically, these are all the capabilities that are enhanced when we share a physical space together. So it is true that thanks to technology, we don't all have to be co-located all the time, but for the very important things in both work and life, it's best when we are sitting together in a room, right? So things that are included in this bin can be things like what my PhD advisor called idea flow, where he talks about how different people in cities have different access to different types of ideas based on the places that they go to in a city. And I think this is a great example of how physical presence can affect the types of ideas, creativity, and kind of challenges and things you encounter throughout your day. So even though technology has allowed us to not necessarily have to be present all the time, we still can't completely throw out presence altogether. And I think Roberto here likes to have an example, which is very, I guess, shocking. And that's the kind of examples that he likes. So when people say, well, you know, we have Zoom now, so we don't have to be in a room all together, he says, well, sure, for the small things, but would you like to attend your daughter's wedding via Zoom? Would you like to attend a friend's funeral via Zoom? I don't think so. I think you want to be there. And I would completely agree with him that these are instances where, you know, being there physically is actually quite important. The experience is very different. So then we have the O, which is for opinion, judgment. And in this bin, we include things like, of course, moral and ethical judgments, critical thinking. We include things like causal thinking, causal reasoning, things that basically require you to be discerning in terms of, you know, making decisions or really understanding whether an input that you have is suitable or is the right type of thing that you require for, you know, doing any type of work. So I guess this is more of a brain analytic part that we have in EPOCH. And then we have C for creativity, curiosity, and imagination. And here we have all these things that require us to think beyond what already exists, right? So maybe some might argue that creativity is a recombination of things that already exist to create something new. We agree that this is, you know, a definition of creativity, but then there's other types of creativity and imagination that require thinking really, really far beyond what already exists today. And we do think that this kind of, the further beyond, the more kind of speculative, futuristic, you know, the bigger the depart from actual reality, that's where human brains still shine. And of course, here we include things like, I think curiosity is a very, very important human trait. And here we also include things like humor, because basically, when you think about what comedians do, they put two things that usually don't go together, and it's that contradiction that makes the joke funny or unexpected. And then we have the last bin, which I think is my favorite, which is H for hope, vision, and leadership. And this bin tries to capture all the capabilities that make us better at looking at the future, planning for the future, inspiring others, motivating others to work together towards a future and common goal. And here, again, Roberto really likes the very shocking examples. And he once asked me, Isabella, what do you think hope is? And as the, I guess, social scientist that is inside of me, I said, well, you know, it's this proof that the human spirit will never give up and grit and all of these like beautiful poetic explanations. And he said to me, as you know, an economist, what he was like, no, hope is actually thinking that something is going to happen, even if the probability of that something happening is either 0 or close to 0. And I was like, oh my God, you just, okay, yes, you're right. But I wouldn't have put it that way. But this is the kinds of things that we want to encapsulate in this bin.
So, Isabella, I want to pull Irving in just a second, but I have a short story to tell you, and then a follow-up question, and then we'll get Irving into the conversation. So the short story is, you mentioned, you know, who would want to get married over Zoom, and I just want to say that my daughter got married in January of 2021. This was during the pandemic, as you recall, and so the wedding itself had to be small, and so we decided to live stream the wedding, and people around the country got together in small groups, got dressed up in their best outfits, and celebrated the wedding remotely. And so we ended up exchanging wedding pictures from all over the country, and it actually turned out to be kind of a interesting and memorable experience. But we did what we had to do in the middle of a pandemic.
Of
Exactly.
course.
Exactly.
So before we get to Irving, I think this framework is great, but in your paper, you really went into detail about looking at all the occupations that exist in today's world and ranking them
Mhm.
in terms of their score. And I just wonder if I mean, there's a lot of data there, but maybe you could sort of summarize the kinds of jobs that score high and the kinds of jobs that don't score so high.
Well, there's a couple of things here. So, the data that you're talking about is ONET, which is one of the most comprehensive data sets on occupational data. This data set is put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics here in the US, and it includes around 20,000 tasks that the US workers do any given year. And right now, I think we're close to 1,000 occupations in the data set, right? So we measured each of these epoch bins for all of the tasks, and then we aggregated them at the occupation level. And then we computed what we call the epoch score, which is basically how human intensive is each occupation, right? And even though it might not be a like perfect one-to-one comparison, it does give us an idea of which jobs, because they require these kind of very irreplaceable human capabilities, might be more resilient to the impact of AI. So things that score very high are things that, I mean, depending on which bins you look at. So the way that we aggregated the scores for each bin into one epoch score made it so that you don't have to have a high epoch score in each of the bins. You just need to have a high score in one of them to be kind of more resilient, right? So you can have different types of jobs that score quite high for different reasons. But perhaps the one that I was most surprised by, I think, is the one that I include in the graphic in the plot in the paper, which is emergency management directors or something like this. And I was like, well, first of all, I didn't even know this kind of job existed, but also it makes total sense when you look at the tasks, because these kinds of folks need to have a lot of cognitive flexibility because they're managing emergencies, which require a lot of flexibility and improvisation, which is something that machines are not very good at. They also require a lot of hope and leadership and ability to plan for the future, because you're in this kind of, very extreme situation where you need to inspire workers and, your team and say, hey guys, we're going to do this. And you need to make hard decisions. So you require a lot of judgment and critical thinking. And hopefully you would also need some sort of empathy to be able to kind of feel for the folks that are in the current, difficult circumstance that they're trying to address. So that's one example of a very high scoring occupation. And then perhaps depending on which capability bin you look at, then you have things like sociologists, anthropologists, and I think this makes a lot of sense. When you're an anthropologist and you go and you do ethnography, you need a lot of empathy because you go there to kind of live and observe with your population of interest, and you need to be able to not judge, but kind of really understand. And I think that requires a lot of empathy when you need to do these kinds of work. And perhaps other occupations that have similar kind of scores that are quite high up would be things like kindergarten teachers, nannies, everybody that works in kind of the care sector. When you provide care to others, you will probably have a very high EPOCH score. And then we can have things like, so economists score quite high as well. I mean, not super high, but reasonably high. They require a lot of critical thinking and creativity to answer questions or ask questions that nobody has asked before. So these types of jobs, right? And I think the cool thing is that if you see the examples I'm giving you for occupations that score, highly in our index, these occupations are not necessarily correlated with educational attainment. And this is good, right? Because it means that you don't have to, it used to be that in previous waves of technological change, the white collar work was kind of the most protected. But here we see that different occupations across the spectrum of educational attainment can be resilient to AI. And I think that's actually a quite hopeful message for folks.
Yeah, well, given that we're at MIT, where did typical STEM occupations like coding or IT work or engineering work fall in your scoring?
Well, it really depends on how the occupation is defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So another one that I don't remember the name exactly, but it was something like information director or information um, operations management or something like that. That was also really high up in the scores. And I was like, this seems surprising. And then when I went to look at the tasks, a lot of them were about planning and strategizing and making kind of setting long-term goals for their team and also mentoring the younger teammates in the team and collaborating and coordinating among the teams. So a lot of this, even though it's called information director or information management, a lot of the work they did wasn't related to the information per se. It was related to the coordination of the human team. And that's what made it very high up in EPOCH. So that's an example of an occupation that we would traditionally associate with MIT folks. But is now, it scores very high. And then if your job is, you're like a entry level software developer and your only job is to code, then you would probably have a very different score.
So there's one more point from your conversation with Irving back at the CIO symposium that I wanted you to drill into before I pull Irving in. He's been waiting so patiently. Um, you talked a lot about having leaders focus on augmentation as compared to automation. Can you just drill down on that a little bit?
Yes, for sure. So this is something that, it keeps me up at night. And this is where I want to do more work in the future. But right now, what I can tell you is that my current thinking is that automation and augmentation are two different forces, two very different effects of technology in the labor force. And one of them, automation, basically talks about how machines can substitute for human labor. And then augmentation talks about how we can use machines to be more productive. And I think that's how the economists would call it, to be more productive as a worker. And so far, I can, I think that augmentation actually has two parts. One of them, which I still don't have a, name for it, but it's the one related to, I guess, um, increased productivity because you can automate some of the tasks that you do today, and therefore you're more productive in your job, right? So instead of having to, for example, input manually my travel receipts, I can just take a picture of it and then be done with it. So instead of, when I travel, instead of taking a couple of hours to do my receipts, I can take like 20 minutes and be done. That is augmentation, right? But there is a different part of augmentation, which we still haven't seen for AI, or we're beginning to see for AI, which is what is AI going to allow us to do that we couldn't do before? And this kind of more transformative part of technology is the one that takes a little bit longer to develop because it requires people actually thinking beyond what already exists and coming up with use cases or saying, hey, I can solve this problem with this technology. So I believe we still haven't seen that much of that, which we will be seeing in the future. And this is the most interesting part of augmentation. But it's the hardest part to measure because it doesn't exist yet. But we will find a way, hopefully. I have two examples for that, and then I'll come back to why it's more important to think about augmentation rather than automation. So two examples. The typical example for augmentation is, with our naked eyes, we can't see bacteria, we can't see very small things like cells or, very small microorganisms. But after the invention of the microscope, we were able to see these things. So that technology gave us the ability to do things that we couldn't do before, right? And that's kind of the typical nerdy example. But then the other example that I also thought about was synthesizers for music. So beforehand, we could only make music with traditional instruments. But now, because we have this new technology, we're able to make sounds that we couldn't make before. And now that gave way to things like electronic dance music. It gave way to, for example, DJs. So it actually allowed us to do things we couldn't do before. And I think that's a very cool example of how technology actually gave way to an occupation like DJs, right? When thinking about why business leaders should think more about augmentation than automation, I do think, of course, there are automating some stuff in your organization to make it more efficient and productive is good. But I believe the most powerful and most transformative effects of AI are going to come from the second part of augmentation that I discussed, which is allowing us to do things that we couldn't do before. So I still don't have the language to necessarily describe this precisely or as precisely as I would like. But just yesterday, I was having a call with Melissa, who's going to be on your podcast. And she said to me, yes, I agree that, if you just go for the cost-cutting automation, that's kind of just marginal gains. But if you think about how can you use AI to complement your labor force, then that is the real kind of game changer. So that's why I would urge business leaders to focus on augmentation instead of automation.
So Irving, besides Melissa Swift, what's your perception? Do you think business leaders are thinking about augmentation the way Isabella's suggesting, or are they mostly focused on automation? What have you heard?
I think that I think they are thinking about it. I think with AI, because it's relatively new, they're trying to decide how to best apply it, where to apply it, and things like that. And let me say that this whole area of the impact of AI on the future of work is such a rich area that, as you were having the discussion with Isabella, all these thoughts came to mind. I mean, for example, on the question of our business leaders thinking correctly about augmentation, that immediately brought to mind Daron Acemoglu's keynote at the 2025 symposium, where he made the point that if a business wants to use AI to save money, maybe, nobody will be very successful if you are 10 or 20% more productive because you automated workers. However, if you are using AI to help you come up with whole new ideas,
Exactly.
innovation, and he gave the example of the assembly line at the turn of the 20th century, where instead of just using electricity to get rid of workers, automate, Ford invented the assembly line. and totally transform manufacturing, that's how you get remember. So
Exactly.
it's this kind of augmentation that Darren totally agrees with you, and I hope you're happy to have a Nobel Prize winner
Oh, of course.
sitting right next door to you
Yes.
you're in the Sloan building now.
Uh, right now, I'm in my office, which is different from Sloan, but Daron is amazing, and I'm so lucky that we are co-located.
Yeah, but it's how do we leverage for all kinds of new things. But let me ask you, Isabella, because the other day, Allan and I were having a discussion about AGI. And he asked me, and I don't know if he meant it as a trick question or a non-trick question.
Irving, I would never give you a trick question.
And it was, uh, AGI in principle is supposed to do everything a human can do better. Now, given that one of the characteristics of humans, as you've described with EPOCH, is emotions, all kinds of feelings, he asked me, so can we train AI to have EPOCH kinds of characteristics?
Well, actually, Irving, I think the question was slightly different. Eh, what I was wondering was if Isabella would consider a definition of AGI to be taking AI and having it gain parity with humans on the EPIC framework, and that until it did that, would we truly have
No,
AGI?
I understand. And that was your question, but then the reason I then went to train AI with the EPOCH things is because the reason AI is so useful is because we train it with data. So AI in the end is all about training the algorithms with lots and lots of data so they can do all this analytics work, Gen AI stuff, etc. And so I quickly went to, okay, so do we have anything that we can use to train AI with human emotions, with hope and things like that? And then I went to, how do we learn all that? And I suspect in humans, we don't learn that with data, we don't learn that with other things. We learn that from each other.
Yeah, interactions.
That's how we absorb that. And I gave Alan the example of your little granddaughter, and she's learning, she's talking to you, she's talking to everybody. He has a 2-year-old granddaughter. And that's,
I'll show you pictures another time.
yeah, that's how we learn. So the question is, if we wanted to train AI with more these kinds of human characteristics of the epoch, Isabella, can you imagine how one could go about doing it? Or is that a silly question about training it? And then we'll go to the next question Alan asked me is, and if we're not able to train AI with EPOCH, given that that plays such a huge role in humans, doesn't that totally mean that AI can never achieve AGI because that's such a big human characteristic? So can you imagine how would you train, or are there people doing research in training AI with human characteristics like that?
Well, what I can think of is, so there's this whole field of where Ross Picard, that she started a long time ago, right? Effective computing, and where she's trying to use computers to, better understand our emotions or interact with emotions and that sort of thing. So I can see that her work could do these sorts of things. There are also some folks who are not
By the
necessarily.
way, I know Rose,
Mhm.
and she's doing that work applying to autism.
Yes.
So it's a very, very specific thing for humans that have disabilities.
Hmm.
I don't know if she's doing that more generally
Hmm.
than to try to help. And I think she's also doing it to try to help whoever is with a person with the in the spectrum to
Hmm.
detect when they are getting upset because
Hmm.
they are in so I don't know. I just don't know if she's looking at training emotions more generally. Maybe she is now.
Right.
So yeah.
So I do know that like her work has been mostly focused on folks with autism. But given that her group is so large, I would imagine that a couple of her students throughout the
Yeah,
years
yeah,
have looked at something that is not necessarily autism related,
yeah, I
but
understand.
maybe studies a different population that is differently abled. Um, so I don't know, but my guess would be that she has done something that is not necessarily
No, 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 I understand.
that. And there are other folks who are trying to do some work at the intersection of, for example, empathy and AI, not necessarily understanding how to train AI to be empathetic, but we're trying to understand the impact of AI in human empathy, right? So it's kind of the other way around. So there is a professor at Harvard, Amit Goldberg, where he is trying to understand the perception that humans have in empathy, whether it was like something, a message that was crafted by a human or a machine. And from what I've read in his latest research, it seems that the comments that were labeled as machine generated, people perceived as less empathetic than the
Mhm.
ones that were labeled that were written by humans, right? But that's kind of the flip kind um, of your question, right? So I don't think I know anyone in particular who's doing that sort of thing. And then my other question would be, and this is usually the question that drives me when I'm doing my research. Um, the question of why, like why are we doing this and why do we want to do this? Um, so my question would be like, why would we want to train AI to do these kind of epoch things or have these epoch capabilities? Maybe as a society, we decide that this is the best way forward and that's what we're going to do. But I do think there should be a kind of let's stop and think, hey, this is a great tool. What do we want to do with this tool? And what do we think are things that maybe are not worthwhile to do with this tool or that we think shouldn't be done with this tool, right? And I think this is a conversation that perhaps is lost sometimes when, there's this AGI race and now everybody is like, this is the thing we have to do. But as a researcher, I'm like, maybe we can stop and ask ourselves beyond the economic incentives, is this something that is really beneficial to humankind? And these are the
So,
kinds of things that I care about.
yeah, well, so I mean, to put the question that I asked Irving a different way,
Mhm.
when you think about epoch, um, y- you know, there's a couple of things that came out of what you just said. First of all, if we were going to build an AI that gained parity in those areas, it would have to be intentional, right? And
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff in the literature right now that seems to suggest that AGI is just going to emerge without intention, and I'm not sure that that's true, right? We
Mhm.
would have to decide that we want to build a machine that has those capabilities if we could. But I think what it also says is maybe AGI is pretty far out in the future,
Mhm.
and that the near and medium term generations of AI really are tools. And what you're trying to do is to figure out how do we make use of them to better
Yes.
what we are doing as humans. Is that fair?
Yes, yes, that is completely it.
But Alan, remember, there is a difference of opinion about how far away is AGI. There are people, I disagree violently with them, who say within 3 to 5 years we'll have AGI
Yeah,
because
but Irving, the point of my question to you is there's a lot of different definitions of what AGI and what ASI mean, right? And I felt that Isabella's paper gave us a way of framing
it
one
was an excellent,
particular definition of AGI and then doing a thought experiment of like, well, is this going to come in the immediate future? And pretty quickly you decide no.
yeah. In fact, Isabella, as Alan is talking, this feels like an interesting direction for you and Roberto
Hmm.
to to try to sort of frame AGI that to achieve it, you need to get these epoch characteristics. And how would you do that? And how would an assistant that doesn't have
Or
them,
would you want to do that?
or would you? No, no, but that's, I'm being totally serious about these are really research topics because as Alan asked me is if you cannot achieve the epoch characteristics in AI, then is AGI and ASI doomed? That's what he wanted to know. And I said, I don't know. And he,
Well, so wait a minute. So let me be a little more precise on that. The fact that you would need to achieve epoch to achieve AGI, in other words, a
Hmm.
machine that did all the things that a human can do, that's a little different from ASI. We might build a super capable intelligence that still doesn't do all the things that a human would do, but could do things like
Can't do it.
find new cures for cancer
Yes.
that would take an army of people.
yeah, but
I'm not trying
nucleus,
to split hairs with you, Irving,
no,
but
no, no, I understand. Um, it's a very interesting question how the lack of the epoch qualities actually will limit what you can do with AGI and ASI. I don't know the answer,
Hmm.
but eh, as we're
but,
talking,
but getting back to the near term, let
yeah,
me
let's talk
get
about
back
the,
to Isabella. So you looked at
Hmm.
this big database of thousands of different
mhm,
jobs, right,
Hmm.
as they exist today, and you
Yes.
rank them. And what I'm wondering is, assuming that 5 years from now, humans still have unique capabilities that distinguish us from our machine friends.
Hmm.
And I use the term friend loosely here. Um, and and we get out the message that augmentation has benefits over automation, and that if you want to make your mark in history and be a Henry Ford, you better
Yeah.
learn how to create or how to leverage artificial intelligence in a new and creative way. And let me just say also to set up this question, people worry about jobs all the time, but it's
Yeah.
much easier to visualize jobs that are going to be impacted and lost as
Yes.
compared to visualizing the jobs that are going to be created and
Yeah.
emerge
right.
from a general purpose technology. So, given that framing, can you just give us an insight into your mind 5 years from now and what jobs are going to look like?
Right. I think you're absolutely correct. It's easier for us to see automation than augmentation, especially that second type of augmentation that I talked about, which is, creating possibilities that don't exist yet. Those take a little bit longer to materialize, while automation happens to the things that exist today. So here we're, limited by our own imagination, right? And so in terms of how jobs are changing, well, the first thing, of course, technology transforms jobs at the task level, not at it doesn't just like completely automate away entire categories of jobs, or not normally. So we are going to see a lot of change in occupations, and we're going to see a change in how we do work for sure. I do expect that we're going to start seeing some kind of new tasks emerge. Um, I'm currently undergoing new research on trying to actually understand the evolution of work based on different technological waves, right? So we're trying to understand how new tasks emerge and how tasks disappear from the human labor pool. So this research is still ongoing, and some of the things that we find are very, very exploratory, so I wouldn't hang my hat on them. But what we are seeing is that there's two different types of new work or new tasks, right? There are the tasks that are new to the economy, and there's tasks that are new to the job, right? So the tasks that are new to the economy tend to be driven by these new technological tools that we have. The tasks that are new to the job, but not to the economy, tend to be tasks that are either very epoch, right? So before, for example, you didn't have to mentor, part of like new members of your team, or communicate with others, or communicate with clients or other people in part of the organization, but now you do, right? So that's not necessarily work that's new to the economy, but it's new to the occupation, right? So we do see these two different patterns emerge. So probably if AI changes work the way that previous technologies have changed work, we're going to see very new tasks that appear in a couple of occupations. And these are new tasks that are very new to the world, while we're going to see that there's going to be changes in a lot of occupations, but the changes are not going to necessarily include new work to the world, but just new work to that particular occupation, right? So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I am seeing, which that I can say confidently because that is from my EPOCH paper, is we do see that there is a shift towards more epoch tasks. So the tasks that are currently appearing tend to be more high epoch, and also the tasks that have high epoch seem to be increasing in frequency. So if you had to previously engage with, I don't know, customers, or if you had to previously engage with others in your work and you only did that once a week, now you have to do that 2 or 3 times a week. So you're increasing in frequency. So these are also changes that are occurring in work that we observe in this paper that we just wrote.
Very interesting. And Isabella, this is so interesting because it gets back to the role of social skills in human innovation, even in STEM disciplines. And I'm sure you're very familiar with Tom Malone's research.
Yes.
And Tom Malone wanted to see if there is, if you can measure the equivalent of IQ for a group. Are you familiar with that research that he did?
Yeah.
And let me just repeat a couple of things. And he said, well, is it related to the IQ of the individuals? Absolutely not. And he did lots of experiments with collaborators. Is it related to the highest IQ of one of the individuals? Absolutely not. What he found is there was a correlation with the most creative groups in a few things. One, the number of women in the group. And the reason for that is, and this has been studied, women score higher in measures of social skills,
Yeah.
of reading the emotions of the group.
Mhm.
It also is groups where everybody participated.
Mhm.
So opposed to, let's say, if you have a testosterone-filled group, they are fighting to have what to say.
Mhm.
Whereas a group where there is more things, they are more innovative. And I don't know how much we've studied beyond this work of Tom Malone, the role of social skills in innovation of groups, even in STEM disciplines and so on. Uh, have you looked at that at all?
No, I haven't looked at that, but that is also a question that I have been discussing with some collaborators lately, because I do think that a lot of the work that has been done on the impact of AI in labor, and we have been so busy trying to figure out if AI is going to take our jobs or not, that we forgot that work is actually increasingly done in teams in
That's right.
organizations.
Exactly.
And maybe, and I was literally talking about this with Melissa yesterday. We have great conversations with Melissa. She's very sharp. Where I said, what if maybe AI can help us be 5% more productive at the individual level, but maybe 15% more productive at the team level. I don't know. This is an empirical question. We haven't
Yeah.
measured it. And I do think there's a huge, 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 area that has been unexplored that I would love to go there.
Maybe you should talk to, by the way, maybe you should talk to Tom Malone about this
Yeah, I think
if,
that would be useful. And
since he's thought about it, because at some level, AI at some level, it's what people have said is almost the extreme of the male mind, which is much, no, which is, I'm being totally serious here, much more analytical and
Mhm,
mathematical and things like that, and less, this is all statistical, so obviously it doesn't mean 100%, the reading the mind, the social skills,
mhm,
understanding how to best communicate with each other, which
mhm,
gets us back to the epoch skills, correct?
mhm,
This notion
mhm.
of reading the mind. And so this is a very interesting stuff. So maybe what we're saying is AI is just like a calculator, that
Oh yeah,
it does its thing very nicely, but it's limited in other things
yeah,
that have advanced civilization.
yes, I
That's
So
agree
it. That
with
that
that.
wow, that would be a very interesting. What do you
it,
think, Alan? Because that was part of what we were discussing the other day.
yeah. So Isabella, I have a couple of follow-ups. They're kind of unrelated, but the first one is, um, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but if I look at general purpose technologies, there's typically a pattern, which I think Irving would agree with, that they follow, that it takes quite a number of years for the general
Oh yeah,
purpose technology to absorb itself into the economy and
Yeah.
into the way we use it, and for
Mhm.
humans to adapt to it. So
Yeah.
in the long term, I think it can be argued that a lot of the prior GPTs were of great benefit to
Mhm.
humanity, but in the
Mhm.
short term, they typically created pain for
mhm,
some group of individuals who were directly
Mhm.
impacted. So when I
Mhm.
think about, AI, and I think about people who are coders and lawyers and doctors and other white collar workers, I think the unique thing about AI is that it will have a short-term impact on jobs for those white-collar workers. And I just wonder, I mean, do you agree with that? And that we're going to go through a very difficult transition as we find the way to find our unique human values and rearrange the 2,000 jobs that we have to take more advantage of the epoch
Right.
characteristics?
I agree with you that usually when, there's a new wave of technological change, there is some pain
Mhm.
while the system kind of changes and adjusts, right? There is this kind of uh, moment of things are shifting around and then we're like, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Mhm.
Whether AI causes a big pain or small pain, I think remains to be seen. And it will unfortunately negatively impact some folks.
Mhm.
But I do think that whether it, does a lot of damage, and, to many people, that is a question for policymakers and business leaders because we're the ones who have to make the decisions so that we can minimize the harm or minimize the pain of this kind of shifting and shuffling around
Mhm.
that is happening in the labor force right now. And I mean, I think, it's not just a question for policymakers, but also for business leaders and
Yeah.
kind of looking at each other and saying, hey, we want to do good things for the world. And maybe that's my kind of more idealized vision.
It's very interesting. There have been some articles, and as I'm sure you've both read, Dario Amadeo, the head of um, what's his company?
Anthropic.
Yeah, Anthropic said that in another, I don't know, 5 years, there may not be entry jobs left for white-collar workers. And Jensen Huang, very recently, who is the head of NVIDIA, said the equivalent of that's total bullshit.
Yes.
That
I would,
AI will, he almost said that, I don't know if he used that term,
yeah.
but it will create all kinds of new jobs.
Yeah.
So here you have two very top executives in the field disagreeing violently with each
Yes.
other. Have
Yes.
you seen that?
So I do remember seeing the news about Amodei's statement, and to be honest, I was quite shocked that he would go out there and make such um, big claims. Big claims require big evidence. And when I saw that, I was like, well, can you please tell me what are you basing your claims on? I would love to see what data you have that I don't have access to. And I was very surprised and I was I was a little concerned because I do think that these kinds of very shocking statements can promote panic in people. And I don't think we need panic right now. I think we need solutions. And it's more productive to think how we're going to minimize these harms and how we can steer this in a way that is beneficial for the biggest number of people possible instead of just making these claims. And I also saw the reply from the CEO of NVIDIA, and I also think Jan LeCun is agrees with the CEO from NVIDIA.
Jan LeCun has said that AI is not smarter than the average cat. No, I'm being totally serious. He has said that, and people have attacked him for that, but he did say that. And so there are big differences of opinion
Yeah.
on what will be the impact. And I think to a large extent, it may be that they're not taking into account the role of these epoch qualities in humans. I
Mhm.
suspect that's what they're missing.
I would think so. I would think so. But hopefully, they will see the paper and then they're gonna be like, oh, actually, maybe, it's
And now maybe we can ask Isabella something you and I have been looking at a lot, which is there is a lot of discussion about, let's take MIT. Should you allow students to use AI in their education, whatever? And if you believe AI is like a calculator, is why wouldn't you? And then the question we've been asking ourselves is, how should the education especially in STEM schools like MIT, evolve
Yeah.
to take in the age of AI? How should it change? And it could be, and we've come back to questions like critical thinking become very, very important. Would you consider critical thinking part of an epoch kind of quality?
Yes, of course. We include critical thinking in the O, in the
Mm,
judgment part.
yes.
So critical thinking, discernment, logical thinking, causal reasoning, all these things I think are really, really important. And I would even go so far as to saying things like common sense should also be emphasized. I do think there needs to be changes in education where it's not about not teaching coding anymore. I don't think that's the answer. I think we should continue to teach coding and we should continue to teach people how these machines work. Because if we know how they work and then we realize that what they're doing is not magic, but it's a product of, sophisticated algorithms, right? And then we can build better machines and stuff like that. But I do think that we need to emphasize other things that perhaps we kind of forgot along the way, which are the EPOCH capabilities. And I think it would be great if these were also included in very technical teaching courses like the ones we have at MIT.
Hey, Isabella, we're getting towards the bottom of the hour, but I did want to just take a moment with you to talk about opportunities with AI. So, Irving and I have talked about this before. I mean, when I look at AI, I see an opportunity to solve what I've been calling scalability problems. And by that, I
Mhm.
mean, there are jobs that exist where it's very difficult to build out enough humans to do it to the level that we would want to do it. So
Yeah.
getting back to, Irving's comment about education, right? I mean, ideally, you would want to have one teacher per student, but we don't. We have
Mhm.
one teacher per
Mhm.
20 or 30 students.
Yeah.
And, there is a school in Texas that's experimenting with this idea of having students learn from AI from 2 to 3 hours, where it gives sort of a customized drill through the exercises of whatever they have to learn academically and have the teacher focus more on things like leadership and other things. I mean, it was kind of funny because what the teacher would focus on is exactly the epoch
Mhm.
types of skills that you were bringing out. But the point is, in education, maybe there's an opportunity to use AI to scale up where it's difficult to do to humans, or also in healthcare. I mean, you get older, you want to have a single healthcare uh, assistant for each person, but it's very difficult to do and very expensive. Maybe
Mhm.
that's another area where AI, or more specifically robotics, can allow us to provide better services because we can augment the humans who are doing that capability in unique ways. And I just wonder, can you expand upon where are the opportunities for us to use AI to really have a big impact? Where's the next Henry Ford coming from?
Well, I think predicting the future is difficult, but I do think that these areas that you mention are areas where we can see a huge potential and opportunity for AI. So I know that especially in the kind of healthcare, home care space, there is a new company actually. It was funded by a couple of academics, Dan Rock and Eric Brynjolfsson, where they helped I think it's like a staffing nurse company, kind of offload their nurses from a lot of the paperwork stuff that they were doing, and then they were able to staff more homes that they couldn't do before, which is great. We want that. There is a shortage of nurses and home care folks, so we do want the ones that we have to be able to see more people. So that I think is, a great opportunity, and we haven't even seen the kinds of gains we can get from AI in these areas. I know other folks that are really thinking about this are in Europe because their populations are getting older and older and they don't have as many folks to go check on them and that sort of thing. They are starting to have some sort of robotics or some sort of like AI systems. I know in the elderly homes. I know this, some folks from a big company in France told me that this was happening, especially kind of in the Paris area. So I do see there's a huge opportunity here. For education, perhaps I'm very new to the education space, and but I can imagine that there are many opportunities here for personalizing the educational journey. Currently, we just started putting together an experiment to try to understand how AI can augment tutors' lesson planning. And we're going to see, because it seems like the literature says that yes, it can help tutors plan their lessons quicker and better, but some folks that are, specialists in pedagogical development say, well, a lot of what AI helps you to do tends to be very mentor or teacher centric and not student centric, and we don't want that, right? So it depends on how you use it. I'm very new to education space, but hopefully once we're done with this experiment, I can come back and tell you all the things we learned from this experiment.
Yeah, so I just want to say I understand predicting the future is hard, although one thing that Darren Aceboglu said at our closing keynote is that, when the internet age came, and Irving, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when the internet age came, it was easy to visualize a lot of the big changes that were coming. And the unique thing about AI is it seems like it might be a bigger change, but it's hard to visualize what those
Yeah,
next what are the killer apps that are going to be coming. It's not as clear.
no, yeah.
Um, and that's kind of, I don't know, I find that kind of amazing, right? We have this powerful technology, but it's hard to visualize what the next thing is going to be compared to the internet. Irving, I mean, do you
Well, I think what happens is, uh, for example, machine learning, deep learning, because it's all about analyzing data, that was easy. With LLMs and Gen AI, that was very difficult. That took us all by surprise
Yeah.
because the notion that you can teach a machine to understand language statistically, we had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And now, what else don't we know? Uh, are we going to be able to teach quote unquote emotions to a machine? When you asked me that question, I said, I don't know. And I suspect we don't know, but I don't know. Maybe there is a way. With agentic AI, it's already going through the trough of disillusionment because it's harder than we think. But all this will happen in due time because
I
it's a
agree.
matter of experimentation,
Yes.
lots and lots. With the internet, we already had networks. So it was a matter of having open universal networks. We already had access to databases. So it was a matter of having open World Wide Web and things like that. So it was the things were there already. They
Mm-hmm.
just got scaled to an incredible degree. That's not the case with AI. AI is more mysterious.
I would also think that because it might be more flexible, then the kind of possibility space is a lot bigger. So it takes us longer to
Yeah, yeah.
explore this very vast possibility
Yeah,
space.
that's a very good point. And that's a very positive point that because it can do so much more, it's going to take longer. By the way, that's the kind of stuff Eric and Dan Rogg said about historically transformative technologies. The
Hmm.
more complex they are, the longer they will take
Mhm.
to deploy across
Mhm.
society. So something when you go to see Eric, you can discuss with him. No, because they wrote a really great paper on that.
Yes, they did. They did. I would love.
Alan, it's been fascinating.
It has been. And actually, Isabella, before we let you go, I want to just give you one short, hopeful story. The other day I had my boiler repaired, and this young man who I believe is pretty close to your age, or at least closer to you than he is to Irving and I. Um, so he came in and he was a very professional, very smart guy. So not only did he fix the boiler, but he had learned to run his own business. And while he was downstairs, he saw my sound studio and he says, "Oh, what is it that you do with all this, equipment?" And I talked about it and mentioned that I was going to be having a podcast on Thursday, and what's it going to be about? And I said, it's going to be AI. I'm talking to this woman named Isabella who wrote this paper. And he says, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to AI because, I have to do everything in my business now, and I'm
Mhm.
looking to have AI, answer the phone for me. I have a friend who, the AI is like an answering machine on steroids, and he has this vision of using it to save him hours so he can do more of what he likes, which is installing boilers and making money and making sure that he provides for his family. So
Mhm.
he's figuring out, um, how to maximize his EPOCH score
Mhm. Mhm.
as he does his job.
Yeah, that's
Amazing.
Anyway, it has been delightful to have this conversation with you. I'm so glad that you came on to our podcast. And also, thank you for coming to the symposium. You've been giving us a lot of support. And so, just to close, I just like to say to our audience to thank them for listening to episode 11. Be sure to join us in our online community. And but for now, that's all we have. So, bye-bye.
All right. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.